Hi, friends. I am making this former bonus episode available to the main feed for this month. We've had multiple weeks with winter weather already and are really fully into the spirit of the winter season. As a result, I thought you might enjoy learning about some farm mechanics we haven't talked about before. Dealing with winter. Now, we don't get winter nearly so bad here as in other places, the North and the Midwest in the United States, Canada further to the north above us, and we don't get nearly as much snow as some of you. Our listener friends in Switzerland and Canada certainly have us beat. But we're in the mountains and we do get our fair share of cold temperatures and snowstorms. And that means we need to be prepared when it comes to the animals. Right now, we have sheep, goats, ducks, chickens, dogs, and cats. And all of them tend to spend a lot of time outside. The farm animals have the barn and the chicken coop, and the cats and dogs have the house and the basement and the garage. But aside from just making sure they have shelter, we need to do all sorts of things to get them and the farm ready for and through the winter. What are some things you can think of that we'd need to do? If you guessed water as one, you'd be right. A big challenge is keeping water available and not frozen for all of the animals. And we have tried a lot of strategies over the years. Last year, for the chickens, I mostly used a heated platform that their water sat on top of. I was using what's known as a gravity waterer on top. And with those, they can work in different ways, but with this one, you fill a bucket up with water and set a base on top of the bucket. Then you flip the whole thing upside down and set it on the heating pad. This had some challenges. First, the heating pad sometimes couldn't keep up with the cold weather, and a rim of ice would form around the water's base that could make it hard to drink from. Second, and more frustrating for me, I sometimes would miscalculate the trajectory of the bucket when I flipped it and would end up covered in freezing water. This looked pretty ridiculous, and after doing it to myself at least once a week all last winter and coming back to the house with my soaking clothes half frozen to me, I decided we needed to try something different this year. We got a smaller heating platform, and I put a big plastic bowl on top of it that I could fill using a hose or a bucket. I didn't have to flip anything upside down, and I could easily refill the bucket multiple times a day if I needed to. What I didn't anticipate was how cold it was going to get. Several mornings we've been below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and when I went out, their water was still a solid block of ice. The water hydrant by the barn has a bad habit of freezing up if the temperature gets below about 12 or 15 degrees, so we'd be stuck waiting for the sun to warm things up so I could dump the ice and use the hydrant to get the flock set up with water again. That wasn't ideal. So the past couple of weeks, I invested in switching them to a big blue heated dog bowl, which does a little better. On the bitterly cold mornings, it does still get some ice, but it's not as hard to dump and seems to be working better than anything we've tried so far. So we've sort of sorted the chickens out for this winter, I think. Not perfect, but it's good enough. The cats have a similar setup with a heated bowl that they can access anytime. And the ducks also like to find it and play around in it whenever they can, because if there's water, the ducks are going to be messing around in it, even if they have plenty of their own. One of our cats will thankfully let us know if he feels the water has been played in too much by coming and scratching at the door and leading us to the water bowl. When I dump the old water and refill it, he will stand in it and use his soaking paws as a water delivery mechanism, licking the water off of them and rubbing his paws while soaking wet all over his head. It's kind of weird, especially when it's freezing outside and he still does it, but it's what he likes to do. We've been particularly perplexed by the sheep this year. Usually we use what's called a trough water heater, which looks kind of like a big disc with a heating element on the bottom. You put it in the water trough, plug it in, and it keeps things unfrozen. But this winter, I'd go out and their water was frozen pretty much every morning. The electric circuit controlling the barn is located in our garage, so I would trudge back to the garage and see that it had been tripped. That means I needed to reset it to turn it back on. Later in the day, I would go out and find it had tripped again. As you can imagine, it was becoming a big challenge to keep the sheep water easily accessible. Early in January, I knew we were about to head into a really cold snap, so I called our electrician to see if he could help me figure out what was going on. I needed the electricity to keep running to the barn. He figured out that we had a couple of issues going on, one of which was the trough heater itself had gone bad and was tripping the circuit. So we hope that problem is solved. Our dogs also use a trough heater, and that's been going for years without an issue. The challenge, as we see in these other cases with the sheep and the chickens, is when one thing goes wrong, it tends to have a cascading impact for a while until you can sort out the issue and get things stabilized again. This is definitely also the case with managing snow. We live on top of a very steep, very tall hill. Our driveway is gravel, which helps a lot in providing traction when you have light snow because your tires can still grip the gravel underneath and don't slide around as much. But when you get a few inches, or when you get ice, you need a bit more help. The first few years we lived here, we just had to roll the dice or take our chances. We couldn't justify the expense of a full-size tractor with snow plowing capabilities, and we hadn't found a service near us that could handle it. The very first year we lived here, we got a 2-foot snowfall. That's the one I talk about in my story, Brownie the Hound Dog, Always Running. That's almost unheard of in the region, and we had no idea how we were going to get out. My husband and I thought that maybe we could roll snowballs down the driveway to clear the snow and make it passable. So we tried it. After hours of rolling and rolling and rolling, we ended up with several 4-foot tall snow boulders that were so heavy we couldn't move them another inch. And there was still more snow, and still no way to get down the driveway. We were unexpectedly saved by our neighbor, who arrived like a hero on a giant tractor with wheels taller than me and dug us out. When he made it to the top of the hill, he paused in plowing and asked us, "What's the deal with all those giant snowballs?" He definitely thought it was funny when I explained what we had been attempting to do, and he left a few of them at the bottom of the driveway as a testament to our naive attempt at resolving the issue ourselves. In fact, we had to rely on him for several years when we got an unprecedented large snowfall. We figured we'd either be stuck for a few days or he'd come find us, and typically he would come find us. We have been extraordinarily fortunate to have him as a neighbor. But a few years ago, my dad, who lives next door, got his own small tractor with snowplow and has been handling the digging out for us. That feels a lot more certain than hoping our neighbor can get to us through a foot of snow, and this year I was also trained on the snowplow for the first time. You can imagine me, friends, adjusting the plow position on the front of his orange tractor and then clutching the steering wheel in a death grip as I crawled like a snail down the driveway. I was pretty convinced as I went down it the first time that the tractor was going to lose its grip on the driveway and send us careening off into the deep ravine that runs along one side. As it turns out, this was an unfounded concern. As I slowly inched down the driveway, the tractor just hummed along cheerfully, firmly gripping the driveway and going absolutely nowhere I didn't want it to. I adjusted and got more comfortable pretty quickly, making the next pass down the driveway faster and with more confidence. I still have a ways to go in learning how to sense when the snowplow needs to be adjusted to better get at the snow, and in learning how to go uphill, which is harder. But it seems a lot less daunting to learn, and my dad is no longer the only person who knows how to use it on our hill. You can see a picture of the setup on our Instagram at Foggy Oak Fairy Tales if you're curious, and get a sense for how steep the driveway is. Now, there's the not getting trapped part of snow, but more importantly, managing snow also requires managing access to food for the grazing animals. Our sheep and goats rely on the pasture grass to get most of their nutrition in other seasons, so it's important that we have backups in place for heavy snowfall. This requires advanced planning. In the fall, I reach out to local farmers who make their own hay. Sometimes there is not enough hay to go around, so I really have to hunt. The past couple years, I've been able to work with a farmer who is, thankfully, able to deliver several large round bales to me at once. These round bales probably weigh about 400 pounds each and are at least 4 feet tall, so there's a lot of hay to work with. We get several in the early fall and place 1 or 2 out in the pasture to begin supplementing the sheep and goats as the grass growing season winds down. The others we store in a bay of the barn, waiting until they are needed. The goats especially will attack the hay with a vengeance as soon as it appears, eating it down vigorously and delighting in jumping up on the bales and trying to knock one another off. My human kids like to do this too, and like showing the goats that they can get up and take control of the hay bales just as well as any goat. The trick is putting out hay at proper intervals to last through the winter. It can be hard to estimate how much grass will be left to winter on in the pastures, how much snow we will get, and so forth. To add an extra layer of security, I also start offering supplemental feed, usually corn and some alfalfa, in the fall as well. This helps provide more energy and keeps the flock's fat reserves up compared to just wintering them on hay. With the age of our sheep, very old, it's nice to give them some extra help and support during the time of year when grazing is harder. The chickens and ducks desperately miss being able to hunt bugs during the winter, but they do fine with a bit of extra food in lieu of their free-range bug hunting. I will, however, note that lately they seem to think if they congregate on our front porch, I will somehow come out and give them more treats or attention or something. The past few weeks, they've stubbornly camped outside the front door for a good chunk of every morning. And as you might imagine, that has led to a lot of poopiness. I was letting them get away with it at first, but once the poop built up and really started covering the porch, it became clear that that wasn't the best strategy. We've been trying to build barriers to discourage them from coming up the steps, which is working with the ducks and not so much with the chickens. But it is looking like we may just be doing a lot more poop cleaning than usual this year if the chickens continue to insist on being stubborn. All in all, winter is definitely a harder time on the farm than other seasons of the year. It's worth it for us, for the joy of having animals and the fun memories they provide, but it doesn't matter if it's absolutely freezing outside and the last thing you feel like doing is trudging out to the barn. You have to take care of your animals. We only have a hobby farm. Our flocks, of both the hooved and feathered varieties, are not very large, and so the corresponding effort for us is not as great as it is on a bigger operation. But especially when you're working through the challenges of winter, and new ones are always presenting themselves, it's easier to understand why lots of folks whose families were subsistence farmers, that is, people who relied on farming to provide their living, were happy or even eager to move on to other careers when opportunities presented themselves. There's been a huge decline in family farming over the years. For example, at one point, Ohio had more sheep than people, and that is decidedly not the case today. A major part of this is the rise of industrial agriculture, which brings the farming of crops and animals to massive scales that make it hard or impossible for small farms to compete. But part of it is also the difficulty and relentlessness of farming. On a real working farm, it's incredibly hard to find a way to take a break, to leave on vacation, to pause. On the podcast episode over the summer called Leaving the Farm, I talked about how complicated it can be to prepare for and take a trip, even on a small farm. It's all worth it to us, but I don't blame anyone who thinks it's a strange way to spend your time. We'll see what the rest of the winter brings. Over this last weekend, we hit 65 degrees, which is shockingly abnormal and concerning in a whole different way. But we hope we're over most of the inevitable bumps that we run into every time we hit another season of freezing temperatures. All I can aim for is to continue to do a little better and refine our setup every year, until hopefully it's all a lot more seamless. Each farm is unique, and each setup takes time to find a groove. So I figure we're about 10 years in, and hopefully that means we're getting closer. That's it for this month. I hope those of you who celebrate have a very merry and wonderful Christmas. Happy New Year to all, and I will see you in 2026.